So in this video, we will talk about one of the most important functions in Vex, and that is point, which is a simple function to read out an attribute from a particular point. That's it. By itself, it's not super interesting, but let's quickly talk about it, and then we will use it for much more interesting things later on. So with a point wrangle, what I could do, for example, is I could read out the color of a particular point on our grid here. So let's quickly visualize the point numbers, and I could read out a new attribute. Let's call it CD2 so that I don't overwrite the color that is already there on each point. And the syntax of the function is point, and let's quickly go into the help by clicking F1 while being on top of the function with my cursor. And then I get the help, and it looks like this. And here you can see the basic inputs is geometry, which means input, the attribute name, and the point number. So what does that mean? If I want to read out from my own geometry that I'm on, I use the input 0, and the attribute name and the point number is then self-explanatory. So let's say I read out from the current geometry, the first input, and what I want to read out is the color of a particular point of this grid. And let's say we choose, I don't know, 0.66. So this way I can save for each point the color that is on 0.66. So as you can see, this is a way to have access to other points while still running over every point separately. And here you can see, of course, every point finds the same color, which is the one of 0.66. So let's actually do this to overwrite our current color. And as you can see, every point now gets the color of 0.66. So while this might be kind of interesting, what I can also do is I can read it out from another geometry, because it doesn't matter where the point comes from. So let's say I have a sphere over here and I put it into my second input, and let's make it a polygon. It could be a primitive as well, so it would have only one point, but in this case, let's do it this way. And let's create a random color on this as well. So here I choose 0.132, and to read this out from the second input, surprise, I only changed the number in the front. And now all my points on the grid get the same number as 0.132 of my second input geometry. Pretty straightforward. What I can do with this, for example, is I could actually create my own attribute copy node. So the attribute copy node, and let's take our sphere that we just created as our example here, as we know, allows us to take two geometries that have the same point count, or actually point distribution as well. So the point numbering has to be the same. And I can use an attribute copy node to, and actually let's move them around because it's a bit easier to understand that way, to copy onto this sphere, which has no colors, all the colors, or actually all the attributes I want from the first input based on the point number. So CD is already prepared. So let's quickly merge this new result with where it comes from. And as you can see now, when you look at it, the colors are the same per point. So let's quickly do this ourselves, because that's actually really simple to do in Vex with the point function. So all I need to do is I want to overwrite the color of this sphere with the color of a point from the second input, and I want to read the color out. Yeah, and which point do I want to steal this attribute from? Oh, the same point my current point number is. So the trick here is to just use ptnum, which of course only works because the second sphere has the same point numbers as the sphere we just worked on. And this way, we basically just created our own attribute copy node with just one line of code. Now, why would you do that? Well, maybe for the same reason that we've already seen with our custom mountain node. We could, for example, integrate into this our own mask function. So let's say only where I, with an attribute paint the mask where this should happen, maybe something like this, I could decide that this function here should only happen if my mask attribute that I just painted is higher than 0.5, let's say, and then only I want to trigger this function. And there you go. Now we have an attribute copy with a mask. Do you often need that? No, but it's just something to explain why sometimes it makes sense to replicate the functionality of an already existing node, because you can extend it by functionality this node doesn't have. And of course, the whole point function will be way more useful in the next couple of videos when we combine it with other functions. Just by itself, it's a bit hard to find a useful case, but at least you can see we can rebuild our own attribute copy with it and even extend it with additional functionality. And just for you to know, there's actually the same functionality for primitives, which surprisingly is called prim. It's the same logic, and then there's also vertex with the same logic, and also actually detail with the same logic, except that there you don't need an element number. But I don't go deeper into those because in practice, point is by far the most important one, and maybe primitive might be one you sometimes need, but the rest honestly is very, very rare that you need them. So we stick with point for now to keep it practical. So we will use this more in the next couple of videos. Thanks very much. See you later. Cheers.